Welcome back, everyone. We're so thrilled with this last presentation, not the end of the conference, but our last presentation. We're so grateful that Don O'Connor from the Miami Conservancy District has joined us, and I guess his wife as well. Glad to see you, Jill. Don O'Connor has been the Chief Engineer of the Miami Conservancy District since July of 2021. He's responsible for managing the planning, design, and construction of MCD infrastructure projects, overseeing property management, and working on community partner projects. Prior to joining MCD, he served as a city engineer for the City of Fairborn and as an administrator and professional engineer for the City of Toledo. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in civil engineering from the University of Toledo and is a registered professional engineer in the state of Ohio. Again, thanks so much for being here, Don. And while Don gets his slides together, I just did want to mention that we have an upcoming conference on water in 3 weeks, and the work of Miami Conservancy District will be spoken about twice. One talk about PFAS in the Dayton region, and another on the agricultural impacts of agriculture. So please do check out the Eventbrite site that I've posted in the chat. We would love to see you there. Okay, Don, thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay. All right. And are you guys seeing my screen okay? Are you seeing just the cover page of the PowerPoint presentation? All right. Well, I really want to thank you for having me today, and I'm really excited about this particular presentation. We get asked at MCD to do a number of these, and just this one in particular, after dropping in a few times over the last few days and listening to some other speakers and the focus on Arthur Morgan, I'm really excited to talk about and tell the story of MCD through Arthur Morgan's experience and see what we can learn from that. All right. One second here. Okay, so this first, before I get started, I kind of want to give an overview of kind of the angle I'm taking here. And I know a lot of people in this conference know at least a little bit about Arthur Morgan, and I assume a number of you know a little bit about MCD. But I want to tell it from Arthur Morgan's perspective while I'm kind of teaching about MCD and how it came to be. And as I was thinking about this, these 10 bolded terms here really stuck with me, and I think they're things that we can learn from and take away from this presentation. So as you see how I have it organized here, Morgan's character traits, which have been talked about a lot over the last few days, these jumped out to me. So one, jumping in or taking action, being willing to do things, to tackle difficult challenges. Thoroughgoing, that's one of my favorite words that I learned from reading Arthur's book on the Miami Conservancy District. Another way of saying detail-oriented, right? Like really getting into the details of problems in the process of solving them. Speaking up, a number of times through his life, as we've talked about over the weekend, he spoke up. And sometimes in rooms where I'm sure it was uncomfortable to speak up in. So we'll talk about a few of those situations. And then adapting anytime, especially a problem with the scale of the flooding from 1913 in this region. But really any problem you're solving or anything you're working on, it rarely finishes the way that you think it will without having to change and make some adaptation on the way through that process. And then conviction also. Once you go through all that work and you get to your solution, having the conviction to stick with it and see it through to the end. So that's Morgan kind of himself, some character traits that I really appreciate. And then his design considerations. These 5 things here: resilience and sustainability are words that we've heard a lot recently. And 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, when they were starting to plan this project, those two words were big and were really important to how the system was created. Innovation, there's a lot of innovation in this process. A peer review, I'll get to that in the first few slides here. And then community has been talked about a lot this weekend also, and I will get into that. So I'm only going to do one slide here in the 1913 flood. There's plenty of information out there, but I want to touch on these three pictures. I think really help get to the heart and help me understand maybe a little of the trauma that was felt by people who lived in the region and lived through that event. And it helps me better understand the actions they took after that event. So this picture is Maple Street in downtown Dayton, which no longer exists. This neighborhood was on the west side of downtown where Sinclair Community College is today. So this was 6 a.m. on the 25th. You can imagine walking out on your front porch in the morning, getting ready for school or work, and seeing that your street is completely covered by water, including the curbs, including the sidewalks. I have not experienced that in my life, so I can't imagine the alarm this person was feeling at that moment. And then 2.5 hours later, this next photo, you can tell the perspective of the photographer has changed, because this picture is taken from the second story of the house that the photographer is in. And you can see the first floors of all these homes are filling with water, at least a couple feet of water on the first floor. So everyone's on the second floor now, if you're lucky enough to have a second floor. If you don't, you're in your attic and you're trying to figure out how you're going to get on the roof. So here's 2.5 hours after that. The water's to the second floor. And consider 1913, there are no cell phones, no weather radar, no predictions of when the rain's going to stop, how high the water is going to get. I'm picturing silence with just the sound of water, and being very, very nervous. So you can imagine the trauma that the region felt collectively as that from that event, and how that led to what happened next. I'm gonna, a previous presenter left the note slides on for just a minute or a few seconds. If someone wants to screen capture anything, these are the ones I'm following, and for the purpose of the recording. So once you see the text, I won't stay on these long. I'll go to the next one, but they are there for a few seconds if you want any of that information. So after the 1913 flood, the region committed to never letting this happen again, the leaders in the region. So they chose Arthur Morgan and his company to do that, to take on that task. So why Arthur Morgan? I think it was interesting that he was in his mid-30s at the time. He hadn't had his company for that long, considering the size of the task that he was to be working on. But he did have experience with flood protection legislation during his time in Minnesota, with planning, design, and construction of flood protection systems. And I don't think the local engineering community had the experience that he had. And previous speakers talked about his approach to problem solving. I think that's a really big key to why he was hired. When he was interviewed, he didn't give a solution at the beginning, because he knows that you can't really, if you're going to do your due diligence and create a long-lasting solution, that it takes time and it takes effort, and he was willing to do that. And I think the hiring of him was a real testament to the leaders of Dayton of that time and their judgment. They really went out on a limb hiring someone from out of town. I'm not following what I'm sure were political pressures at the time. And it paid off, as we'll see here moving forward. And in this picture, Arthur Morgan is, I can always pick him out in pictures. He's got those deep set eyes, but up here in the upper row, third from the right. So peer review, this is an interesting one. I was at a dam safety conference a couple years ago, And at these annual conferences, there are always presentations about previous dam failures and what went wrong, what we can learn from those. This one really stuck with me based on what I had known about Arthur Morgan at the time. So this is a picture of St. Francis Dam in California near Los Angeles. The dam was completed in 1926. For reference, MCD's flood protection system was completed in 1922. So this was completed 4 years afterwards. This is a large concrete block dam. And this was designed by William Mulholland, who some people may have heard of. He was responsible for a lot of the water infrastructure projects in the building of Los Angeles and the growth of Los Angeles. I know the name from Mulholland Drive and from Tom Petty's song, Free Fallin'. And as soon as I heard Mulholland, I looked that up and made that connection. So anyway, he was very famous, and he was known for getting things done quickly and cheaply, getting them done under budget, making things happen. So this picture was shortly after the dam was completed, and this picture is less than 2 years later after the dam failed. From a similar perspective, almost all the concrete is gone. As part of the failure, over 400 people were killed. There was a 10,000 ton chunk of concrete of the dam that was washed 1 mile downstream. Just to give perspective, help us understand how powerful water can be compared to the things that we build to hold it back. So what Mulholland did is he essentially cut and pasted from his only previous concrete dam design, Mulholland Dam, which is still standing. But that dam design was not sufficient for this location for a number of reasons. So he did not do his due diligence, and he was famous for not wanting people to question his work. He wanted to get things done and get it done his way. So what did Arthur Morgan do? The first thing after Morgan was hired is he reached out to national experts on dams to form a board of consultants to review his work and his team's work through the entire process of designing and constructing this system. That's a huge reason with how innovative this project was, that it is still in the shape it is today. And I think very important lesson for all of us to learn on any big efforts that we're working on. And MCD still engages a board of consultants today. In fact, in the last 3 years, we met with them 4 times talking about future work coming up at our dams. So preliminary planning, this is one of my favorite pictures. This is one of the survey crews that was sent out initially to do a very thorough review of the entire watershed of MCD, or of the Great Miami River. So this thoroughgoing approach here, so some of these keywords we saw earlier, thoroughgoing approach. He was going to take his time and go over the whole watershed, and floods are a watershed-wide phenomenon. And so he said it needed to be a watershed-wide approach and solution. So here's a quote from Morgan on his outlook on how he approached this. He said, "My most emphatic suggestions was that here was a problem such as seldom, if ever, had been handled successfully in America. That thoroughgoing studies and plans would be essential, and that those in authority would need to resist popular demand to make dirt fly in construction before dependable plans could be matured." And as part of this process, he also had his staff thoroughly study dozens and dozens of previous dam failures to make sure that his system would not meet a similar fate. So I'm going to do a few text slides here with those keywords. So the innovations, some of the innovations that came up in this preliminary planning process. I mentioned the watershed-wide approach. So multiple dams on multiple streams, not just one huge dam on the main river. Also multiple tools. So it wasn't just dams. They investigated all different types of flood protections, dams, levees, and preserved floodplains. I highlight the preserved floodplains because of how innovative that was and how that is something that we look at today and is much more popular than it used to be. Let the river live where the river has always lived and have humans back up and give it some room. Dry dams also were very innovative and very rare then and now. Most dam buildings, they want to take advantage of the money that can be made in power generation from permanent pools. Also, no moving parts. If anyone's ever talked about gates at the dams, that's not true. That we don't have any gates at our dams. The sizes of the pipes that go through the dams control how much water goes through. And the local public control, which I'll get into a little more in a few minutes here. Resilience of the system. There's minimal impact on land and existing uses, not just resilience of the dams and the infrastructure, but also the land around it. So the effects in the land around the rivers is felt for days and not weeks because of using a multifaceted approach. There's a quote here from the Board of Consultants of how they encouraged the use of dry reservoirs and felt that was better for safety and stability of the structures. And sustainability. So making a system that'll last with minimal maintenance. There's always maintenance. We're working with that now, but the earth and dams and levees were more sustainable. Earth and rock holds up better over time than concrete and steel and other man-made materials. So they went through the initial planning and then the Ohio Conservancy Act. So this was a very, the Conservancy Act and the official plan were very important. None of this happens without these kind of what I see as boring, tedious work leading up to the actual design and construction. But this is a picture of Governor James Cox, who was a Dayton native, who was governor at the time. He was very helpful in getting this Conservancy Act passed in the state of Ohio and becoming law. The key, and Morgan talks about this a lot, is a local sustainable funding source. And that is so critical in my mind for infrastructure. Infrastructure we want to last a long time, so it should be planned, designed, and built to last a long time. And if you have a local funding sources, state and federal funding sources and grants that maybe come down from, especially federal, the budgets are hard to predict. It's really not reliable in the long term. So this was really important to be built with local money and is still maintained with local money. So this Conservancy Act was passed even after. I have a picture of the Supreme Court here. There was challenges in the state Supreme Court and the federal Supreme Court, but it was able to get through and get passed. And Morgan's quote here on the bottom line: the Conservancy Act had opened new vistas as to the possibilities of local initiated and financed social cooperation. A lot of words and themes that we've heard this weekend. So that brings us to the official plan. So this was what was settled on after all the design work. Here pictured is Colonel Edward Deeds on the left. He was the champion, the major champion from the local leadership. Him and Morgan were really the team that did a lot of this pushing to get this through. And then on the picture on the right is the board, one of the early board of consultant groups taking a tour of the construction project. So on this one, I say all 10 keywords were needed as far as community, innovation, sustainability. The system was the first of its kind, which, so you can imagine, had a lot of detractors, a lot of people that didn't think, they wanted something that was proven and that had been tested. So the American Society of Civil Engineers says that this was the first regionally coordinated flood control system in the United States that employed retention reservoirs for controlled release of floodwaters. So another nod there to innovation. So the Conservancy Act allowed the creation of the Conservancy Court. Conservancy Court was and is made up of 9 common pleas court judges from the 9 counties where the Conservancy District operates. In the Conservancy Court, those 9 judges had to approve this official plan before it could be put out to bid and construction could start. There's a lot of pushback from every county, from the citizens. I could get into a lot of detail of that, but the bottom line is that Deeds and Morgan, and really if Morgan did not have Deeds support and Deeds out front, it's really questionable if this whole effort could have gotten through. And some of the key detractors were brought on board because of Deeds' work and help. So on the property side, building 5 dams and having huge reservoir areas behind them that can be flooded involves a lot of properties, you can imagine. So this is a map from our current GIS system. On the bottom, running left to right, is I-70, and kind of the peach color, and then north to south you can see 75. So on the left is the Englewood Dam and reservoir, and on the right is Taylorsville Dam and reservoir. The yellow lined properties are what properties that MCD owns. The red and blue are showing the footprint of the retention basin if it was filled to its brim with water. You can see how far those stretch back. So that town at the top middle is Troy. About halfway up is Tip City. So you were talking Huber Heights all the way to Troy is where this water could be stored. So in that area, there's about 77,000 properties, not in just that area, but all of the area, all the way from Piqua down to Hamilton and all 5 dams, about 77,000 properties that had to be appraised individually. And with eminent domain involved, that's one thing that the Conservancy Act allowed, was eminent domain, which is always controversial. So you can imagine the amount of pushback from that. About 1,900 property owners filed exceptions. About 500 of those appealed to the Conservancy Court and were not able, and some of those were not able to be settled. So about 150 of those cases went to trial. And again, I'm imagining 150 trials on property acquisition. I just can't imagine, really grasp the amount of work that staff went through to make this happen. And there's a large variety of property types also. So we have flood rights on some properties. We have owned some properties. We have easements on some properties. There's contracts on some properties. There's a lot of different ways that were needed to make this, make it happen. So constructions, I have a few pictures here with construction. I'll go through them quickly. The first 3 here are from, you talk about community with Arthur Morgan. These are from the construction camp. So this is a typical home for a family of a construction worker at the construction camps. This one is at, this is Huffman Dam. This is a community hall at the Taylorsville construction camp. And this is a school building at the Taylorsville construction camp. We have hundreds, I believe actually thousands of pictures on our website. I'll show you a link at the end from professional photographers at all 5 dam sites. They're really fascinating to look through. So here's a picture of construction at Lockington Dam of the concrete portion, what we call the outlet works, where the water is let through the dam. I could spend a lot of time on this, but that would be for another presentation. And this last picture is a picture of Huffman Dam, looking at the hydraulic fill process. Is another innovative process that MCD essentially perfected through building these 5 dams. But this camps especially were very, very important, I think, to the quality of, because of that community that he created at each of these sites, really helped the quality and the long-term sustainability of this flood protection infrastructure. So the system has worked. So we're coming up on 100 years next year since everything's been completed. We've seen some big rain events, and it's really a world-class system, with so much credit going to Morgan and his team and their approach and their vision for this system. Some of the lasting influence, as you can see in this picture, upstream of this is Taylorsville Dam, is the reserve where 5 Rivers Metro Parks has operated parks for the last many decades. For about the first 40 years, I think, MCD operated parks at these reserve locations. And Metro Parks has taken over and really taken it to the next level. Also, the Conservancy Act was very influential and has most of the water district laws in the nation have been modeled after this one. Also, MCD technical reports. There's very good documentation of all the design and background work that MCD did. That led to one of the things that led to the field of geotechnical engineering, which didn't exist at the time of MCD construction. So I guess to leave you with some thoughts on what we can learn from Arthur Morgan from this effort, and that can help us in future endeavors, future tough decisions, tough problems that we have to solve. A simple quote, but always consider the whole. That's one that we go back to a lot around here at MCD. And all 10 of those keywords that I mentioned, really thinking through those at the beginning of trying to make a decision of how to attack an issue, how to solve a problem. And engineers are problem solvers. That's what we're trained to do. And even though Morgan didn't get a degree in engineering, you don't need one. Really, you just need the right problem solving approach, experience, and the right mindset. Here's a few more quotes that I think help sum up some of the important takeaways from MCD. These first three are from Morgan himself. So up to that time, no similar project of anywhere near its size had been initiated and carried through by local initiative and local expense. The district made an enviable record of operation without privilege or political patronage. That's something that comes up a lot, and I'll talk about here in just a second. The Miami Conservancy District is notable because its engineering features, but it is nonetheless notable as an example of social cooperation. And then the last one, Colonel Deed said of Arthur Morgan, I think this really, he says it better than I could. The people of the Miami Valley owe an eternal debt of gratitude to this man. He brought to this project vision, integrity, thoroughness, ability, and persistence, qualities without which the final success would have been impossible.
Dawn, thank you. That was so interesting. Wow. And the photos were awesome.
Yeah.
You really have thousands of photos on your website?
Yes. So these links here, the number of things, but the bottom one, the historical photos, if you go to our website and search for them or dig a little, you can find them pretty quickly, but here is the link. Yeah, and you could get lost in there for days.
Gosh, that's really exciting. I will definitely check it out. We have about 15 minutes for questions with Dawn. And one thing, I don't know how long the actual construction took, Dawn. It looks a lot more complex and and extensive than I actually realized. Yeah,
so it started in 1918 and finished, started in 1918 and finished in 1922. So that's all the levees that we build in all the cities and the dams, all 5 dams.
And the planning process was also several years?
Yes. So Morgan was engaged shortly after the 1913 flood, within days. And so that's March of 1913. And so almost 10 years from the beginning of the planning process. And it was just as much time to get to construction as it took to construct. So those efforts with the Conservancy Act and going through the surveying and the study and the different options really took a lot of time, and I think is just as impressive as the construction work itself.
So actually, folks can just raise their hands to be unmuted and asked on directly. So he was 30, or there you go, Lee, go ahead.
The financial sustainability, Don, I did not understand what that meant, how it was funded when it was done and how it's been sustained.
Yes, yeah, good question. I did rush through that a little bit. So the fund, initially there was $2 million raised by City of Dayton, or people around in the area of City of Dayton. And that was an initial push, but not nearly enough to build the project. And at that time, they didn't know what needed to be built. The construction ended up costing over $30 million in 1918 money. So you can imagine, I believe it's over $500 million today if we were going to try to build this system the same way. So to pay for that, the Conservancy Act allowed the Conservancy District to sell bonds. And then the Conservancy Act also allowed the district to levy assessments against the properties that were flooded in 1913. So the bonds kind of helped front the money to build the project, and then the assessments collected over the years paid back those bonds. So I believe 1949, 47 or 49 is when all those bonds were paid off by the assessments on the properties that were originally flooded. And those assessments are still what fund us today for the projects we've done since then, and the maintenance that has been carried on ever since they opened in 1922.
Oh, thank you.
Mhm.
I see that Larry Foster has asked, have similar dry dams and other types of projects been used elsewhere?
Yes, they have, but not very frequently that I'm aware of, and definitely not very frequently in the US. I haven't done much research on other dry dams since I've been here, but what I've seen and what I've found is most of the dry dams in the US are out in the West, kind of in the more arid, the dry areas of the country that are just for flood. Maybe there's not a really good water source there, but there can be heavy rains periodically. So it's not as much, I guess, as I would hope. But when you think of the advantages that the public sees of permanent pools with recreation on lakes and power generation possibilities, that has continued to be the dominant reason for dam construction.
Thanks, Don. Geeta, I see your hand is raised.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
There has been a lot of flooding recently in eastern North Carolina around Pineville, Lumberton, which is incredibly flat. Can dams like this work to help mitigate flooding in very flat areas?
It is, yes, it is possible. It can be more difficult. A good example in our system is Lockington Dam, is the longest of our 5 dams, but it has, I believe it has the least amount of storage capacity. So it is located on Laramie Creek, north of Piqua, Ohio. So it's about 45 minutes north of Dayton. And up as you get north of Dayton, for those of you that are familiar with Ohio, you get into pretty flat farm country up there. And if you picture Hoover Dam out west, you picture those, almost vertical cliff walls. So it's very easy to build a dam into those rock canyons. But, one side of the Lockington Dam is built into there is a ridge there that makes up the river valley, but the other edge of the river valley is much farther out. So it's possible, but it can be challenging.
I'd really love to hear about some of the visitors from other places who have come to see the dams. I'm sure you've hosted some of them.
So I've only been here about 3.5 years, but I do know that our board of consultants, they are from all around the country and have been for the last 100 years, and so they come and visit periodically and tour the dams. We do get interest in dams. I have seen a number of papers written about MCD from all over the country and from universities. But yeah, as far as visitors, I've been wondering if there'd be interest in tours of the dams or more, actual physical visits to them. I think really the parks and the trail system around here brings a lot of visitors to the area who might happen upon the dams, who might not have known of them before.
Would anybody like to be unmuted to ask a question of Don?
And I guess one thing I
Or
wanted to
there's,
mention,
or yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead, Don.
yeah, just real quick, while people are deciding if they want to ask a question. One thing I wanted to mention that I missed there at the end was that thinking about the success of infrastructure projects like this, or success of any large effort, important effort, I feel like this project was a true success. And a lot of times with infrastructure, there can be a short-term success. And speaking to Arthur Morgan's, disdain at times for political, the political climate and how that can control how sometimes decisions are made. A lot of times those can be short-term success and can be shared and celebrated as success, but are they really sustainable, and does it really hold up in the long run? And this is such a great example of something that was done properly with that long-term sustainability in mind.
Rich?
Yes. I'm wondering what all is involved in maintaining the system, maintaining the dams, and what your perspective is in terms of the earthen dams, maintenance, longevity compared to concrete steel, how this system ranks in terms of, you talk about the longevity and the good functioning. The maintenance question is a good one, I think. What's your perspective?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. And maintenance is hugely important to all infrastructure, and definitely on dams also. So, and the building I'm sitting in right now was donated by Colonel Deeds, and it was envisioned to turn into a museum to celebrate this effort, and not envisioned to house staff for the next 100 years and beyond. But we are now full, the building is full of staff because of the maintenance that is required. I think that's something that may have been underappreciated at the time, how much maintenance it would take. So the maintenance, the day-to-day maintenance of earthen embankment structure, so that's our levees and our dams, is keeping good turf on the soil to make sure that turf is stabilized and doesn't erode during rain events. So keeping good turf on there means mowing frequently. So a lot of our staff is field staff. I'd say at least a third is field staff that is in charge with mowing and keeping and filling groundhog holes. Groundhogs are a threat to earthen embankments, especially in levees. But then we have the maintenance of the concrete. We have concrete flood walls in cities. We have concrete walls as part of the outlet structures of the dams, concrete revetments on the slopes in the cities. So that needs to be cleaned, and the joints need to be cleaned and sealed. Concrete needs replaced periodically because it'll crack and fail due to freeze and thaw over the winter. So, and that really speaks to thinking of concrete and steel and how being exposed to the elements can cause it to deteriorate. Well, the elements don't cause soil to deteriorate, and rock, especially certain kinds of rock to deteriorate. So right now we're looking at some really big maintenance projects on the concrete of all of our dams and in our levee systems through the cities. So from that perspective, I'm glad that we have majority earthen embankment structures. I can't imagine the scale of work we'd be looking at right now with this 100-year-old concrete if these structures were all completely made of concrete.
Yeah, I actually have a follow-up question, Don. Do you have any sort of comparison to the typical maintenance for a typical steel and concrete dam structure?
I do not off the top of my head, no. But there are, in the Columbus area, there's other dams around Ohio that they aren't quite as old as ours, but they have more concrete. And I think that's something probably within our staff we have a little more knowledge of, but off the top of my head, I don't have a good grasp on that.
Don, I see that Kathy at least would be interested in a tour, as would I. Maybe that's something that we could help to organize with your anniversary coming up, or just past.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think so. I would talk to my boss about that, but I can't imagine. I'm sure we could make that happen, and yeah, talk about what dam might be the best one to tour.
Yeah.
But
They really are beautiful. John Morgan. I think you're, let's see. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay.
There you go.
I was wondering if there has been any major repair to the concrete parts of the dams to date, or will this, what you mentioned coming up, will that be the first major renovation?
So I would describe a major work happened in the 70s at all 5 dams. So the concrete was deteriorating and pretty badly in this by the time we're getting to the late 60s and 70s. And so a material called shotcrete was installed. I hesitate to say because it was literally shot. It was literally like shot out of a hose under pressure, and to stick on the walls at the dams, the areas of the walls that were deteriorated at that time. So that is now, we're looking 40 years ago for the most recent of that shotcrete material, and it did help. It helped replace that concrete that literally had fallen off the faces of the dams. Now these walls are anywhere from 3 feet thick at the very top to over 40 feet thick at the bottom. So losing some material at the face does not put the whole structure at risk, but it needs to be stopped. So the shotcrete was installed in the 70s, but now that is failing and needs to be replaced and addressed. So, and we have actually finished our first major project recently on concrete repair at the dams, and that was up at Lockington Dam north of Piqua, and we did a renovation on the right wall. We replaced some of the concrete at the top of the wall and then concrete on the face of the wall. But really over the next 20, really now for the next 20 years, we're in the middle of studying to what extent we need to do concrete repair and do some wall stabilization actually. So we're just getting started, but I'd say we've completed one major project recently.
Don, it sounds like you really love your job. I'd like to hear a little bit about what it means to be an engineer.
Yeah, I really do. I put a little bit of that in the bio, and I think some of the influence on me growing up in Dayton was going to Englewood Dam, for camp and going on hikes with my family and running up the dam for soccer conditioning, and then riding the bike trails, downtown on the levees. And it's with Morgan's vision created these inspiring spaces, and his desire to make them public has affected people like me to the point where, as I grew up and figured out engineering would be a good career for me in my mind, and that MCD is where I wanted to work. And because it was, it has fond memories. It created fond memories for me, and I think it has for countless other people. So just in general, it's easy to be enthusiastic working here and working on things like this that are so important to the rest of the community and the region. And just engineering in general, back to thinking of Morgan again, it's problem solving. It really is. There's no magic to it, but it's experience. It's being thoroughgoing, and I don't know. Some of us think solving hard problems are fun, and I'm one of those people.
Well, we're so glad that you joined us today, Don. That was a really wonderful presentation to close out the presentation portion of our conference. So thank you so much.